Ethan Carter, a decorated military veteran with a passion for restoring not only classic cars, but also his roots in nature, finds solace in the sprawling acres of his organic farm. Once a barren piece of land, Ethan has transformed the property into a thriving homestead complete with a modest farmhouse, a barn filled with vintage tools, and fields of vibrant crops and grazing animals. Every inch of the farm holds memories of his journey, from the discipline of military life to the peace of rural living, and he cherishes the freedom it represents. The tranquility of his days is abruptly disturbed by an unwelcome visitor. Karen, the self-appointed president of a local homeowners association, HOA. Karen, known throughout the community for her unwavering belief in perfect conformity and her knack for overstepping boundaries, has taken it upon herself to enforce a slew of draconian rules. Despite Ethan's property being more farm than suburb, Karen is convinced that the same standards should apply. With a clipboard in hand and a glare that could freeze water, she patrols the edges of the property, her eyes always on the lookout for any deviation from her rigid vision of neighborhood aesthetics. During their first encounter, Ethan is in the midst of tending to his prized heirloom tomatoes when Karen strides up the gravel path. In a tone both patronizing and accusatory, she informs him that his farm equipment is unsightly and his decorative barn lights, intended to highlight the rustic charm of his home, are a violation of the community's strict lighting ordinance. Ethan, who has never had any issues with the local rules before, is taken aback. To him, these are minor details that hardly justify the level of intrusion Karen is about to unleash. Karen's argument is less about genuine concern and more about the sheer power that comes from her title. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter," she declares with a self-satisfied smile. "Even your farm must conform to the standards that keep our community beautiful and safe." Ethan, with his quiet dignity and deep-seated love for the land, explains that his farm has been legally zoned for agricultural use, and that his lights are meant to be functional and decorative, not disruptive. Yet Karen, resolute in her mission, waves off his objections as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. In this charged moment, the seeds of conflict are planted. Ethan senses that Karen's insistence on enforcing the HOA standards is less about safety or aesthetics and more about wielding power. Her attitude, smug, entitled, and dismissive, infuriates him. As the encounter closes, Karen hands Ethan a hastily printed final warning notice. Even though Ethan knows that no HOA rule was ever formally accepted regarding the specifics of his farm's decorum, he reluctantly accepts the paper, fully aware that this is merely the opening salvo in a battle he never expected. Ethan returns to his work, now with a sense of foreboding. He contemplates the balance between his hard-won independence and the intrusive overreach of those who believe they have the authority to dictate every aspect of community life. This initial clash sets the tone for what is to come, a struggle where personal freedom and integrity collide with bureaucratic tyranny and entitlement. The following morning, Ethan awakens to an unsettling sight, a bright envelope taped to the front door of his farmhouse. Opening it, he discovers a fine, an official-looking document charging him $750 for community aesthetic violations. The notice cites obscure regulations about lighting and external appearances, rules that Ethan never consented to when he moved onto his legally zoned farm. As Ethan processes the absurdity of the fine, he steps outside to find Karen standing on the sidewalk. Her arms are folded tightly, and her expression is one of smug triumph. "You see, Mr. Carter, the rules apply to everyone," she says coolly, as if reading from a script perfected over years of petty authoritarianism. For Ethan, the fine is not only unjustified, it's the beginning of an escalation that threatens the very spirit of his independence. Refusing to be cowed by Karen's theatrics, Ethan decides to take action. Drawing on his experience as a law-abiding city official, he reviews the local zoning laws and quickly identifies the discrepancy. His property, due to its agricultural designation, is not subject to the same aesthetic restrictions imposed on residential neighborhoods. With this knowledge in hand, he drafts a formal complaint to the local zoning office, outlining the arbitrary and unfair nature of the fine. However, as soon as Ethan sends his complaint, the situation begins to spiral out of control. Within days, multiple inspectors arrive at his farm, each citing different violations, from unapproved modifications to his barn to alleged irregularities in the placement of solar panels on his roof. Ethan realizes that Karen is orchestrating a campaign of harassment, mobilizing every available resource to enforce rules that were never meant to apply to him. Karen's behavior grows increasingly brazen. She attends community meetings with a determined glare, making sure that every homeowner hears her claims about the dangers of nonconformity. With every public appearance, she expects not only full compliance, but also a show of support from her fellow board members. Support that she seems to take for granted. Despite the mounting pressure, Ethan stands his ground. At one particularly heated HOA meeting, he cites local ordinances and demonstrates with a detailed chart how his farm complies with all legal standards. His calm, measured tone, bolstered by irrefutable evidence, contrasts sharply with Karen's dramatic flair. Yet even as Ethan speaks, it becomes clear that Karen is unwilling to acknowledge reason. Instead, she doubles down, her eyes flashing with indignation as she insists that personal feelings have no place in the strict enforcement of community rules. The confrontation leaves Ethan both frustrated and resolute. He understands that this is no longer a simple disagreement over aesthetics or minor infractions. It is a power play. Karen's relentless pursuit of compliance is less about the welfare of the community and more about her own ego. As inspectors continue to show up unannounced and fines begin to accumulate, Ethan's resolve hardens. He vows to fight not just for his rights, but for every homeowner whose voice has been drowned out by Karen's authoritarian tactics. By the end of the day, the atmosphere around the farm has shifted from serene to charged with tension. Ethan surveys the damage, both physical and emotional, knowing that the battle with Karen is only just beginning. The fine, the inspections, and the constant barrage of threats are mere preludes to a confrontation that will test the limits of both the law and the community's patience. At first, Ethan's discovery of these unsettling details is slow and cautious. Late one night, while reviewing security footage, he notices a peculiar pattern. Every time a complaint is lodged against him, a new violation appears on his record, despite there being no real issue with his property. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan reaches out to a sympathetic board member, someone who has quietly questioned Karen's decisions for months. In hushed tones over the phone, this insider reveals that many of the fines and infractions are nothing more than a sham, designed to keep homeowners in line and bolster Karen's power. Fueled by a sense of duty to protect not only his rights, but also those of his neighbors, Ethan begins compiling evidence. He carefully documents each encounter with inspectors, saves copies of every fine, and even records conversations with board members who hint at the fraudulent practices behind the scenes. With every new piece of evidence, the picture becomes clearer. Karen is not interested in maintaining community standards, but in establishing an iron grip over the neighborhood, one arbitrary fine at a time. At the same time, Karen's methods grow more aggressive. She starts making veiled threats about eviction notices and the possibility of seizing property for noncompliance. Ethan finds himself increasingly under siege, not just from bureaucratic overreach, but from a woman who seems willing to risk everything to maintain her control. The tension on the farm reaches a boiling point when a neighbor, in tears, recounts how Karen intimidated him into signing away rights to a portion of his property. Ethan realizes that this isn't just about his farm anymore. It's about a community being held hostage by fear and entitlement. Even as the corruption within the HOA begins to unravel, Ethan faces a daunting challenge. The more evidence he gathers, the more isolated he feels against an institution that has, for too long, operated in the shadows of local government. In his heart, he knows that exposing Karen's misdeeds will not only vindicate him, but also liberate his neighbors from the grip of an abusive regime. With steely determination, he continues to collect proof, each document, each recording a silent testament to Karen's abuse of power. As dusk falls over the farm one evening, Ethan sits on his porch reviewing his evidence, his mind racing with plans for a counterattack. The idyllic view of the fields and the rustle of the corn now serve as a stark reminder of what is at stake. the freedom to live by one's own rules, and the courage to stand up against tyranny. Though the mounting pressure is immense, Ethan is resolute. The battle lines have been drawn, and the coming confrontation promises to shake the very foundation of the HOA's authority. At the next HOA meeting, a tension-filled atmosphere grips the room. Ethan arrives armed with a thick file of legal documents, each page detailing the limits of HOA authority. As he methodically presents his case, a hushed murmur runs through the audience. Neighbors exchange uncertain glances, their previously muted dissent now beginning to surface. Ethan's evidence is irrefutable. He cites zoning laws, community guidelines, and even recent amendments that Karen blatantly disregarded. His voice remains calm yet firm, a stark contrast to the rising anger in the room. Karen, refusing to yield, fires back with her trademark arrogance. "Your property is part of this community, whether you like it or not," she insists, her eyes darting around the room in search of an ally. But as Ethan continues his presentation, one board member after another begins to question Karen's narrative. Whispers of betrayal ripple through the crowd as some admit that they, too, have felt the sting of her heavy-handed policies. Amid the confrontation, Karen escalates once again by threatening a lawsuit, one that would target not only Ethan, but anyone daring to question her authority. The atmosphere grows charged, and a palpable sense of injustice hangs in the air. It is at this moment that Ethan decides to strike back in a way that is both public and irreversible. He arranges to have the entire evidence he's gathered made available to the local press. In doing so, he not only exposes Karen's illegal maneuvers, but also galvanizes the community to demand accountability. With the press now involved, the dynamics shift. Local news crews swarm the neighborhood, capturing every heated exchange and every incriminating document. Ethan stands at the center of it all, a reluctant hero fighting for truth and fairness. His measured words and compelling evidence resonate with the gathered crowd. The community, long silenced by Karen's threats, begins to see that her emergency measures and unfounded fines are nothing more than a pretext for consolidating power. As the meeting draws to a close, the once unified front of the HOA board starts to fracture. Members begin to voice their discontent, and the public confrontation leaves Karen visibly shaken. For the first time, her ironclad control over the neighborhood is in serious jeopardy. Though she continues to insist on her right to enforce the rules, the seeds of dissent have been sown, and they promise a reckoning that cannot be easily ignored. Ethan departs the meeting with a bittersweet sense of victory. The battle is far from over, yet he has ignited a spark of resistance among his neighbors. The extreme measures taken by Karen have backfired spectacularly, and the community now stands united in a quest for justice. On his farm, as twilight descends and the fields bathe in the soft glow of dusk, Ethan contemplates the next steps. He knows that the fight against bureaucratic tyranny will be long and arduous, but the taste of victory, however small, is a reminder that courage and truth can triumph even in the face of overwhelming odds. Karen's plan is desperate and calculated. With the police involved, she intends to create a spectacle that will reinforce her authority and discredit Ethan's resistance once and for all. However, the officers, upon realizing the baseless nature of her complaint, begin to question her motives. Their confusion and eventual disapproval adds insult to injury, and Karen's credibility takes a significant hit in front of the entire community. Undeterred by the setback, Karen quickly shifts tactics. In a bid to salvage her image, she secretly hires a private investigator to dig up dirt on Ethan. The investigator, armed with a discreet camera, is sent to snoop around the farm and the nearby town. But fate intervenes when Ethan, ever vigilant, captures the intruder in action on one of his security cameras. The footage, grainy but unmistakable, shows the investigator sneaking around Ethan's garage, a violation of privacy that leaves little doubt about the dubious nature of Karen's plan. At the next HOA meeting, Ethan seizes the opportunity to reveal the damning evidence. The room falls silent as the security footage plays on the large screen, leaving no room for Karen's denials. The community watches in shock as the layers of her scheme are peeled back, each revelation exposing a new facet of her desperation. Karen's face turns a shade of red as she struggles to find a rebuttal, her authoritative tone replaced by sputters of indignation. With Karen's actions now in the spotlight, neighbors who once feared her relentless enforcement now begin to voice their own grievances. The collective outrage is palpable. Ethan, with his calm demeanor and ironclad evidence, stands as the beacon of justice amid the chaos. He reiterates that the police were called over a trivial matter, a mere embellishment on the part of an overzealous enforcer whose true intentions were never about community safety, but about personal gain and control. The fallout is immediate and severe. Local media pick up the story, and soon the entire neighborhood is abuzz with the scandal. Social media posts, blog entries, and even town hall discussions reference the incident as the final nail in Karen's coffin. No longer can she hide behind the guise of maintaining order. The truth of her actions is now inescapable. Ethan's response to Karen's final, desperate move is measured yet resolute. He makes it clear that no amount of intimidation or manipulation can silence the voice of justice. His determination to stand up against abuse of power has not only protected his farm, but also inspired his community to reclaim their rights. In the charged atmosphere of the meeting, the scales have irrevocably tipped in favor of transparency and accountability. As the meeting adjourns, Karen's protests are drowned out by a growing chorus of support for Ethan. The sound of footsteps and hushed conversations outside the meeting hall signal a community awakening, one that will not stand for tyranny, no matter how cleverly disguised as civic duty. Ethan's calm yet forceful rebuttal has turned the tide, setting the stage for what will be the final reckoning of an entitled enforcer who once thought she was above reproach. The movement gains momentum as more residents come forward with stories of past abuses and arbitrary fines imposed by Karen. A petition demanding accountability circulates like wildfire, and soon enough signatures are gathered to force an official review of the HOA's practices. The city, alerted by the growing number of complaints and supported by Ethan's meticulously compiled evidence, launches an investigation into the HOA's operations. As the investigation unfolds, the true extent of Karen's misuse of funds, her unauthorized expenditures, and her blatant disregard for the law are laid bare. During one particularly tense community meeting, a vote is taken. The message is clear. The homeowners demand change. One by one, board members who once echoed Karen's draconian policies begin to distance themselves from her. The vote is overwhelmingly in favor of removing Karen from her position of authority. The decision is met with a mixture of relief and triumph, as the community finally witnesses the collapse of an institution that had for too long imposed its will on their lives. Karen's personal downfall is swift and public. The once feared HOA president is forced to step down amid a storm of public humiliation. In a final desperate bid to salvage her reputation, she attempts to deflect blame onto minor procedural errors and technicalities. But the evidence is irrefutable, and the community's collective voice proves too powerful to ignore. The local government issues hefty fines against the HOA for its illegal enforcement tactics, and several board members find themselves facing legal consequences for their roles in the scandal. In the midst of the chaos, Ethan watches with a sense of hard-won satisfaction. His battle against bureaucratic tyranny, though arduous, has resulted in a victory that benefits not just himself, but every homeowner in the community. As the dust begins to settle, the once oppressive presence of the HOA is reduced to a cautionary tale, a relic of an era when entitlement was allowed to flourish unchecked. Ethan returns to his farm with a renewed sense of purpose. The quiet hum of the fields, the rustle of the crops in the wind, and the gentle clucking of chickens serve as a reminder that true freedom lies in the ability to live authentically, without the constant shadow of unwarranted oversight. With Karen removed and the HOA's practices under strict legal scrutiny, the community is poised to rebuild and redefine what it means to live together in harmony and respect. For Ethan, this chapter of his life, marked by struggle, perseverance, and ultimately victory, serves as both a personal triumph and a beacon of hope for others facing similar battles. The tide has turned, and the promise of a fairer, more just community now feels like more than just a dream. In the weeks that follow, the legal ramifications of the HOA's abuse become undeniable. The city, acting on the avalanche of evidence, levies substantial fines against the association for overstepping its jurisdiction. Investigations reveal that many of the rules, especially those selectively enforced against residents like Ethan, were never properly ratified by law. Homeowners join forces, filing a class action lawsuit that not only seeks restitution for past wrongs, but also demands a complete overhaul of HOA governance. Local courts issue injunctions that restrict the HOA's power to impose fines or perform any action without clear legal authority. As the legal proceedings unfold, several board members are called to testify, their testimonies confirming long-held suspicions about fraudulent practices and misuse of funds. Even Karen's shady lawyer friend finds himself entangled in the legal web, facing inquiries that cast further doubt on the legitimacy of the entire board. Ethan plays a pivotal role throughout the proceedings. With a calm determination and a wealth of documented evidence, he stands as a pillar for his community. His meticulous records not only validate the claims against the HOA, but also highlight a broader issue: the dangers of unchecked authority in private governance. As each piece of evidence is laid bare in court, the narrative becomes impossible to ignore. A system designed to empower a single individual has crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. By the time the verdict is reached, the HOA is not just fined, it is ordered to undergo a complete dissolution. The community is granted the freedom to reorganize under a new, democratically elected body that promises transparency and fairness. Ethan's final power move is both symbolic and transformative. He works closely with local officials and community leaders to draft new guidelines that protect homeowner rights and prevent any future overreach by similar organizations. As the legal dust finally settles, the once feared HOA becomes a cautionary tale in municipal history, a stark reminder that even the most entrenched power structures can be dismantled by truth and collective action. With the HOA dismantled and legal consequences in full effect, Karen's personal life unravels in parallel. Once revered by a faction of the community for her staunch commitment to rules, she now finds herself a pariah. Public humiliation, legal inquiries, and the stark reality of her misdeeds combine to force her into an irrecoverable decline. Facing mounting fines of her own and a relentless media spotlight, Karen is forced to step down, not only from the HOA, but from the life she once knew. Her reputation, once built on intimidation and entitlement, is shattered. Neighbors recall her earlier bluster with disbelief as she is spotted in moments of vulnerability, hurriedly leaving town meetings, being confronted by former supporters, and even facing personal legal issues. Rumors spread quickly that her house is being put up for sale, and creditors begin to circle, unwilling to extend any further credit to the disgraced former president. Even in her professional life, Karen is unable to escape the fallout. A job offer at another HOA, ironically enough, is rescinded at the last minute as her track record becomes public knowledge. The downfall is so complete that even her closest allies begin to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with a figure now synonymous with corruption and abuse of power. For Ethan, the sight of Karen's humiliation is bittersweet. It is poetic justice, a final reckoning for a woman who abused her power at the expense of an entire community. Every news report and every whispered conversation in the neighborhood reinforces the idea that entitlement, when unchecked, always leads to ruin. As Karen is forced to pack up her belongings and leave the community in disgrace, Ethan can't help but feel that justice, long delayed, has finally been served. In the weeks and months after Karen's departure, the neighborhood slowly begins to heal. The oppressive shadow of the corrupt HOA recedes, replaced by a spirit of genuine community and cooperation. Homeowners, now emboldened by their collective victory, come together to rebuild a system based on fairness, transparency, and mutual respect. Ethan, who once fought a lonely battle on his beloved farm, finds himself at the center of this renaissance. His farm, long a symbol of his personal freedom and hard work, now serves as a gathering place for neighbors who celebrate their regained independence. On a warm summer evening, as the sun sets over rows of freshly planted crops and the sound of laughter drifts through the air, Ethan sits on his porch, reflecting on how far they've come. In a final humorous twist of fate, a playful neighbor delivers a mock HOA violation notice for something utterly absurd, perhaps a complaint about the brightness of the fireflies in the cornfield. Ethan, with a wry smile and a shake of his head, holds the paper up as if toasting the irony of it all. They really tried, he muses aloud, his voice carrying the gentle satisfaction of poetic justice. As the community celebrates their newfound freedom, the story of Karen's reign becomes a legend, a cautionary tale recounted at neighborhood barbecues and local gatherings. It serves as a reminder that when ordinary citizens stand together, even the most overbearing powers can be overcome. The echoes of Karen's misguided authority have faded into history, replaced by the vibrant, resilient spirit of a community that refused to be bullied. The final mic drop moment comes not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. Ethan, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of hard-won experience, gazes out over his land and the community he helped transform. In that serene moment, it is clear, the fight for fairness and freedom is never truly over, but neither is the hope that, together, people can reclaim what rightfully belongs to them. Fade to black.